Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 370 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Melinda Snodgrass, who you may remember from our panel on the Orville back in episode 288, and from our panel on the Magicians back in episode 199. She's the author of many novels, including the Circuit series and the Edge series, and she's also written scripts for TV shows like The Outer Limits and Sequest DSV. Her Star Trek The Next Generation script, The Measure of a Man, has been voted as one of the 10 best Star Trek scripts of all time. Together with George R. R. Martin, she edits the Wildcard series of Shared World superhero anthologies, and she's currently serving as executive producer on the upcoming Wildcards TV show. And we'll be speaking with her today about her novel The High Ground, the first book in her Imperials series of space adventure novels. And today's show is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And I want to give a special thank you to John Torvaldson, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. All right, so now let's get to our interview. All right, so we're here with Melinda Snodgrass. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, David, for inviting me.
Yeah. Okay, and so your novel, The High Ground, is dedicated to George R. R. Martin. So why did you want to dedicate the book to him?
Well, because it went on a long, incredibly complex journey to become a novel. So I had started a version of this book years and years ago, and it's one of my trunk novels. You know, every author has a trunk novel, things that, get hidden away and you never see the light of day. But I had done a reading from it at a convention, and George had come to the reading, and he fell in love with my universe. And he came to me and he said, I want to play in your universe. So why don't we do it like we do Wildcards and turn it into a shared world? And we'll do it a science fiction shared world, and we're going to do it together. And I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. And George, so I had my character, Thracius, Tracy Random Bell Manor, and he had the antagonist, the villain character, Boho, that he had created when we were going to do a shared world. And we had invited some other writers in, Laura Mixon and Steve Lay and a few other people. And then we weren't able to sell it. It was very frustrating. Nobody wanted a science fiction shared world. And so after a few years, I sort of said to everybody, look, guys, this is the universe I created. I'd really like to play in it. And so I'm going to go back to just trying to write it as individual solo novels. And everybody was like, we get it. We understand. That's cool. And George was like, would you like to keep Boho? And I went, yes, please, if you'll let me. I'd like to use your villain, who referred to my character as lowborn scum all the time. So that's why it sort of, in some ways, indirectly, George was the genesis for the later versions of it, because, I had created the world and the vision I had of it, of where our future would go. But he gave me Boho. So.
Well, and so for people who might not even know about Wildcards or even Shared Worlds anthologies, could you just explain about that?
Okay, well, Shared Worlds, they began years and years ago with a series of books called Thieves' World. And they were very, very popular for a while. And George and I, who were playing in this role-playing game that George was running for us, and then decided to turn our obsession with this role-playing game into money, how it basically works is the creators of the shared world create a universe, a sandbox, if you will. So George and I created the Wildcards universe, which was about very real-world look at superheroes in present-day United States. This was back in 1986, God help me. And so we created sort of the overview of it. It's as if we were the executive producer of a TV series and said, here's the overarching plot. And then once you've got your sandbox, you go in and you invite your friends to come and play with you in the sandbox. And so we did that. And then they proposed characters. And the fun of a shared world is that you get to use each other's characters, not just write your own. And also that it's sort of like the best of being in a TV show's writer's room, because we all work together, interact, kick around ideas, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? And that's how shared worlds work. So if you do one, you want to make sure that your contributors are people who are very collaborative, who like to work with others, work well with others. You don't want a writer who's very protective of their characters and their creation. You want somebody who's like, yeah, by all means, take my character, see what you do with it, use and abuse them, and are always curious to see how a character is viewed through another writer's lens. So that's sort of what a shared world is.
And so Wildcards has been very, very successful. I mean, I think there are something like 23 books in the series, and it's being turned into a TV show right now.
That is correct. Actually, there are 27 books. I edited the book number 28, which is set in Great Britain. It's going to be called Three Kings. It will be out early next year. And we actually have 2 in the pipeline. We have Three Kings in the pipeline and also a book called Joker Moon. And so that will put us at 30 books. And yes, I am in Los Angeles right now because I've been working in the writer's room on the shows we're developing for Hulu, 2 television series, one about our Jokers and one about the Aces, which is our word for superheroes.
I mean, given all that success, I'm a little surprised you weren't able to sell another Shared Worlds project. Is there any reason why you think that was?
It was a number of years ago. I mean, a number of years ago we were trying, and this was before the sort of huge Game of Thrones bump and the wild cards getting set up at UCP and all these various different things. So I think, and the market, I mean, we're the longest running, and in fact, as far as I know, the only still exited shared world anthology that's out there. So I think the bloom was just kind of off that rose, and George wasn't quite George. I mean, he was big, but he wasn't George R.R. Martin at that point. So,
you don't think it says anything about sort of the state of outer space science fiction being?
I think that was probably part of it. At the time, space opera wasn't very popular. And then along came Ty and Daniel, and with their James S. A. Corey books, The Expanse, and they bucked the tendency. I mean, because if you talk to editors back in that time period, they would say, oh, nobody wants space, nobody wants spaceships, they want more dark, contemporary, edgy, blah, blah, blah. And then Ty and Daniel came along and proved that wasn't the case at all. So...
Right. I actually, I interviewed Ty a few years ago. I think it was more like 5 years ago. And I just went back and re-listened to it because I thought he had mentioned you in it, and he did. And it basically sounds like the Expanse came about because of you, because you suggested that he should run the sort of Expanse role-playing game that he was doing. And that's how he met Daniel. And that's how the whole thing kind of got started.
I guess in a way that's true. I mean, Ty and his wife Shanae moved down to New Mexico, and we all became friends, and I recommended Ty to George as an assistant, and then Ty just, they just slid into our circle, which was, just lovely that we all sort of became such close friends. And Ty had been running The Expanse as an online game for friends, and then, we were a big role-playing crowd, so I was curious to play in it, and so we played The Expanse, and then Daniel said to him, this would make a great book series. And boy, was he ever right. I mean, I adore the books. I think they're just fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's quite striking that in your little community there, you have George R. R. Martin, who has the most popular fantasy show on TV, and, Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham, who have, I don't know if it's the most popular science fiction show on TV, but it's certainly the best, in my opinion. And maybe Wild Cards will be the most popular superhero show on TV. I mean, it's quite a powerhouse community there.
Quite a batting average, isn't it? Yes. As George calls it, the New Mexico Mafia,
Yeah. No, that's just really great. Okay, so tell us more about the High Ground. So you, at the point where you decided you were going to go it alone, kind of what was the, how about the world? Tell a bit more about the world. So why were you so excited about the world that you had dreamed up?
Well, it started actually, I often get my ideas because I'm a very visual writer. I think I was born to be a screenwriter and maybe someday a director because I see everything in pictures. And I had this sudden vision of this like 9-foot tall alien ant-like creature with mandibles and claws and, just hideous, terrifying creature. But it's cowering in absolute terror from a small human holding a machine gun. And I got to thinking about humanity and our tendency to be really, really mean monsters. I mean, we're kind of the biggest mother whaters in the universe. And I thought, if we do invent a faster than light speed drive and go out into the universe and meet other aliens, I am convinced that the first thing we will do is kick the holy crap out of them, because we fear the other. We can't even manage to get along with each other if a group or individual seem different than. So I wanted to explore that idea of a society, a highly stratified society, where the aliens have been conquered mercilessly by the humans. So instead of us always fighting off the invading aliens, we are the invading aliens. And that was sort of where it came from. And I was trained as a lawyer, and I'm very interested in law, economics, and governance and how politics works. So I wanted to create a society to explore those issues of otherness, of power structures, and why a society would create I wanted an aristocracy because they're just a lot of fun. And I figured that if you're trying to prove you're better than the 5 civilized alien races that you conquered, you would want to up your cred and say, we are even more perfect than you are because we have an aristocracy. And I do have my people all through the books talk about what a ludicrous system of government it is, but it's the one they've got.
And this aristocracy has developed from corporations that we know. So you talk about, there's something called the Fortune 500, which is sort of the aristocratic families, and then they're descended from like McDonald's and Nestle and things like that.
Yes. George had so much fun with Boho. He is the Knight of the Golden Arches. He had a lot of fun creating Boho's corporate background. And I have Nokia, I mean, various FF, and they don't call themselves, they just think of themselves as the FFH now because it's 500 years, and some of that's sort of lost in the mist of time.
Now, you said that you just wanted to write about aristocracy because it's fun, but do you worry about corporations becoming a sort of new aristocracy, or?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, and this is not to say I'm opposed to capitalism. I'm not by any means, but I believe in well-regulated capitalism. And I could see when companies become so big and so powerful that they can actually, influence the direction of countries and nations, then I think you may have a problem. And truly, money is the great leveler now. I mean, it's the thing that surpasses all boundaries, all borders, all nations, is how much money you've got. And it affects every aspect of life. I mean, what we've just seen with Epstein is a classic case of that. The man is a billionaire, he has connections, and so they skate. They become beyond, they're untouchable on some levels. And I think that's a real concern.
Right. If people are listening to this in the future, we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, who was just charged with sex trafficking, basically, I think, and but had evaded. I mean, it was sort of known. This has been known for 10 years, I think, or more.
10 or 15 years, yeah, that this was going on.
But had been able to protect himself with his massive fortune and political connections and things like that. So for sure. So in this future, the monarchies come back, and gender roles have sort of regressed to a more traditional arrangement. So talk about that.
Yeah, I looked at it, and I did want to look at the issues because I really feel like women's rights are oddly tenuous, and certainly in this current era, as we've seen these assaults on women's autonomy and the right to control their own bodies. I think it would be very easy for us to lose that. And I wrote a story, a bit of a digression. I wrote a short story for a book series that George edited called Dangerous Women. And they asked me to write an essay about what made women dangerous. And the essay I wrote said it was the pill. The birth control pill made women dangerous because it meant we had control over our procreation. It meant we could pursue careers. We could have sex the way men have sex without quote unquote consequences. And that became quite frightening to some certain segment of the population. And so there are these assaults on it because it goes past abortion. A lot of these places where they have these strict abortion rules are also gunning for birth control as well, because it sets gender roles much more in concrete. But when I looked at it, I thought, when you're going out into space, you're colonizing planets. If you happen to end up on a planet that isn't a Goldilocks planet, a sort of very Earth-like world where it's harsh environment, and the thing that becomes precious, a precious commodity, is your ability to sustain the population. And so that over the ensuing years, women fell back into a much more traditional role because they were protected. And the other factor is that the humans are one species versus my five civilized alien races. And so there is this push to outbreed the aliens. Which you see now. I mean, you hear on the fringes of the right wing. I hope I'm not being too political, but sometimes you have to. On the fringes of the right wing, you hear an awful lot about how there have to be more white babies. We've got to have more white babies because, we're going to be overrun. And I assumed that sort of feeling would continue when we had aliens. And so the idea that a woman's role is to marry, have children, run the home, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And the book doesn't go into this a lot, but there's the implication that Earth has been pretty ravaged by climate change. And so, humans have to spread out to all these alien worlds.
Yes. And in book 4, which isn't out yet, but has been done, there's a scene where my heroine Mercedes and her husband Boho return to Earth, which is being run by a powerful family, as they're trying to recondition and bring the Earth back by trying to deal with the ravages of climate change.
Right. I guess I only read the first book in the series, so anything I say is only I completely understand. But I want you to know that, yes, I do actually, they talk about the Earth because it's the home world, but it's a world that we, messed up horribly and sort of had to move on. And they've instituted, we learn there are fines for only having one child or no children or something.
Yes, that it's a little bit National Socialism. It's the Nazis rewarding good German families that had more babies, or Aryan babies, and I just thought that makes perfect sense, that you would punish people who don't have enough kids and don't marry and make different choices. I mean, even gay men, and I also have a Catholic Church that's a little different than our Catholic Church, because there's a certain order of nuns who bear children fathered by various priests. So,
right. Well, so tell us. I mean, so the Catholic Church is a major factor in this world, and sort of Spanish culture is very sort of prominent in the aristocracy. So talk about that, and talk about this character you mentioned, Mercedes, who's one of your two main protagonists.
Yes. Well, I was interested in I come from New Mexico, and I grew up in a minority majority state where I've always been the minority as an Anglo. And I just thought there was something interesting in exploring. And I love the Hispanic culture. I mean, there's so much romance and passion and to it that I just thought it would be fun to use that instead of a more English, or British-based aristocracy. And I wanted to have these two main characters. I knew I wanted to write a grand love story or a romance with a capital R, and yet still explore societal issues. So I created Mercedes de Aranga, who is the heir to the throne, but shouldn't be because she's a girl. But her dad only had 9 daughters, and with 5 different wives, he never did manage to get a boy. And rather than have the throne fall into the hands of his hated cousin, he goes ahead and changes the law so his daughter can inherit. But in order to be the emperor or the empress of the Solar League, you have to be a military leader. So the first book is about her realizing that she's going to have to go to the military academy and learn to be a soldier when she's 18 years old. and being horrified at the prospect because she had thought she would marry and do the things that a woman normally does in the Solar League. But her dad had other plans. So it's her coming to accept her role, and ultimately over the series of books embrace it. And then she meets Tracy, my other main character, my lowborn scum, as George calls him, who is a scholarship student at the academy. And they fall in love, and then it takes a long time. They have a very fraught relationship over a number of decades. One of the other things I wanted to do, which is what George and I came up with when it was going to be a shared world, was that we would follow these characters from age 18 into their 50s. So I've kept that because I think it's fascinating to watch people grow and change and develop. And so as the books progress, when I finish book 5, which I'm writing right now, which is the final book, both Mercedes and Tracy and Boho and everybody will be in their mid-50s.
Well, yeah, I want to come back to that. But so before we get to that, so in this first book, the characters are going to this military academy that's a space station in orbit around this planet called the High Ground. And and like you said, Mercedes is part of the first group of female cadets that this previously all-male institution has ever had. So when you were kind of imagining that scenario, did you do research on like the integration at West Point or things like that? Or like how did you sort of think through those dynamics?
Yeah, I had read up on that. I mean, the difference is in our society, of course, we had legal challenges that helped open up these institutions. And here it was by fiat, by, the rule of one man. But there's sort of a underplot that runs through all these books about what's really going on, that there's a secretive thing at work as to why the emperor only had 9 daughters and no sons. That begins to become clearer as the books go on. But so it was a little bit different in that I could just, I could make it a little harder, I think, in some ways, although it's never been easy. And I made it less fraught in some ways for my first class of women because they are somewhat untouchable. I mean, she is the emperor's daughter, so you're not going to have the kind of grotesque hazing that some of the first women at the military academies faced, because you can't. If you do that, you're likely to ruin your family. So I could tone it down a little bit from what was certainly tough for the first group of women cadets in our military institutions.
I mean, to what extent do you identify with Mercedes as a character? Because, I mean, I heard you say, for example, that you were the only woman writing for Star Trek The Next Generation when you were there. And I would imagine there have been experiences throughout your life where you were in overwhelmingly male environments, or?
Oh, yes. I was one of that first large class of women to graduate from law school. And when I went to work at the law firm I worked at for a while, I was the first and only woman that my boss had ever hired. And I literally had a bunch of male lawyers from this big office building run downstairs, and I heard them calling, "We hear Charlie's hired himself a girl. Where's the girl?" And they all came and looked at me in my office as if I were, a creature in a zoo. It was very bizarre. So, yeah, I do identify with her a great deal because I've been in those situations. And I guess I'm second generation, or whatever they call it, second wave feminism would be my era as we move through this. But, yeah, those were hard battles in the early going.
I was also, I don't know a lot about this, but I believe that your father was a businessman and that you were sort of the heir to the business or something. I was wondering if that made you identify with Mercedes in any way. Yes,
very much. My dad was just fantastic. He was the center of my life. I loved him so much. And he gave me every opportunity to study opera in Europe, to ride horses, to, he sat me down when I was 16 and said, "We're opening a checking account and you have to manage it," and, on and on and on. And he had, at the time of his death, he was managing a small natural gas and oil company. And now I actually manage the company. I took it over in 2002 and I've been running it ever since. So I have this sense of history with with being the heir apparent, if you will, or the heiress apparent to a business. And I'm really grateful for the opportunities he gave me. I mean, it is weird though, because at times my dad would slip, and I had a half brother who was a great deal older than I was. And, but Dad would sometimes he would say, my other son, John. And then, people like Senator Montoya, who was having lunch with us that day, was laughing and saying, wait a minute, what's she? Your other son, John? Because he put a lot of hopes and dreams on me. And, I hope I lived up to them. I tried.
Right, because he took you to business meetings with him from a pretty young age, right? Yes,
I traveled with him a great deal. I was on airplanes from the time I was probably 5 years old, and a lot of my friends, my contemporaries, didn't get to fly till they were grown-ups, and so it was a different experience.
Yeah. Do you have any memories that stand out in your mind from going to a business meeting when you were, I don't know, like a teenager or something?
I remember that, sometimes these business meetings, I mean, these were hard drinking gentlemen. And my dad, he never let up. I mean, everybody else would be, having their martinis and bourbon and just not really focusing. And my dad would be holding his glass and still talking business. He was so focused, and so smart. And I just remember sitting and watching that dynamic of how I was like, no wonder you always control every situation, Dad, because he had incredible charisma. He's not a big man. He was only about 5'6", but he had tremendous charisma and just control, and probably one of the smartest people I've ever known.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So then this other character you mentioned, Tracy. Tracy is short for Thracius, which sounds Roman to me. Is there a story behind that name?
Partly because Walter John Williams, another one of our writing friends from the New Mexico Mafia, had been a game master for us, and he was running a Roman Republic campaign for 10 years that Daniel and George and myself and several other people played in for years. And we all fell in love with Imperial, well, not Imperial, but the Republic, Roman Republic era. And so one of my editors kept saying, but Tracy is a girl's name. And I said, no, it actually isn't. It's gender neutral. It can be used. But I realized I needed to give him his formal name, and Tracy is the nickname. And I thought, well, I'll make it Roman in sort of honor of that fun time we all had playing the Roman game. And then the random was a little bit of a hat tip to our dear friend Roger Zelazny. I was playing a little bit with some of his naming techniques. So that's where Thracius Random Bell Manor comes from.
Right, yeah. Roger Zelazny is actually my favorite author. For people who don't know, Random is one of the 9 princes in Amber, in the Amber series. I actually want to come back to Roger Zelazny if we have time. But yes, I mean, it's interesting that you say, you have, as we mentioned, the Spanish influences and the Roman influences, because this future society, it's this real melange of different cultural and historical influences. Mm-hmm. I mean, could you say what are the different...
Yeah, I mean, I thought part of it was that, human society, or humans, we create stories and myth. I mean, and so this is a society that actually is very much myth-based. It has taken pieces of anything that will help it support its sense of entitlement and power, and has created a myth that really doesn't make any sense on a lot of levels. Because it is this melange of whatever we think will work. Because I wanted to look at that fact that we tell stories. And that's one of the reasons, I know another digression here, one of the reasons I really enjoyed The Last Jedi, although I know a lot of people hated it, because I thought it was all about deconstructing myth. And I think that's really interesting and fun. And I created a society where myth and stories are controlling it for the most part.
Yeah, I love The Last Jedi, just parenthetically there. But I mean, cause I think for exactly that, people, if they're curious, they can go and listen to our review of it. But I think for exactly the same reason you're saying, the sort of subversive, surprising plotting of it. But so, I mean, I'm not as probably familiar with some of the historical, references that you're drawing on, but it sort of seemed to me it reminds me of Jane Austen a little bit. It reminded me of sort of the British Navy a little bit.
Oh, yes. I grew up reading Horatio Hornblower because they were my father's favorite books. I then went on to read, oh my God, Master and Commander. Why am I blanking on the author's name?
Patrick O'Brien.
Patrick O'Brien. Walter John Williams ran a British Age of Sail game for us for decades and quizzed me when we went to Britain one time about what kind of ship is that? Is that a sloop or is that a frigate? We really get into these games. So I love all that. I really enjoy Jane Austen and Georgette Heyer. And in fact, I was a part of the Regency dance group that turns up at World Cons. And when we don't have enough girls, I dance as a British naval officer. And then when we don't have enough boys, I dance as a British naval officer. And then I put on my Empire dress and get to be a girl when we have enough guys. So I just find that whole period. And I think you learn a lot about society in terms of its entertainments and its manners and how it behaves. So I like to play with that.
So the cards where you write down who you're going to dance with next, that's a Regency thing?
That's a Regency. Oh, very much so. Yeah. You would have a little card tied with a ribbon on your wrist, and then gentlemen would come over and put their name down for the gavotte or the waltz or, whatever it was you were, and trying to dodge the guy you didn't want to waltz with was always great fun,
Well, so how about some of the more science fictional elements of the story? Like I said, it takes place on a space station, and they have these sort of fighter spacecraft that they pilot. How much thought did you put into those, and did you sort of consult with anyone else?
Not really. I took a leaf from Ty and Daniel. I mean, one of the things, because the kids are young and they're not on the second book picks up when they've graduated and they're on their first missions. I've always felt like explaining technology that doesn't exist is really boring. And, Ty and Daniel never explain the Epstein drive in The Expanse. It just works, And one other friend of ours used to say, somebody says, how does this work? And the response was, it runs on plot. So I tend to do that myself. For a TV pilot I had come up with an idea that the way we did Faster Than Light Speed was we folded space and we went through dimensions and cut through them and blah, blah, blah. So my Faster Than Light Speed is called Fold. It's the Fold technology, FOLD. And so you translate in and out of fold, and then it still takes some time to get from an outer solar system to a planet. I tried to at least make it consistent within my made-up rules, but I didn't spend a lot of time explaining it because, it's all hand-waving. I mean, ultimately, we're writing fantasy the minute you have Faster Than Light Speed drive.
Mm-hmm. How about the space station? It sort of has a ring around it that's connected by cables to some sort of central structure. Was there any, do you have did you draw a map of that? That
I did a huge amount of research on, partly because I was asked to develop a TV series set on a space station. And so I had all of these books about torus designs and, how you would actually control and what the spin would have to be and, all of these issues. I think I have about 6 or 7 books on that in my library. So that's one place where I did put in a lot of effort to try to research how space station technology actually works.
And part of it is there's a hyperloop. Is that like a Elon Musk kind of hyperloop, or?
Yeah, maybe not quite as fast as Elon's, but yeah, they have this sort of little train, and that this is a place where the big ships, the big star cruisers come in to, mostly carrying tourists, come in to dock, and freighters carrying goods. I mean, you're not going to move wood and steel, from other planets because that's stupid, unless it's like a very precious commodity, a special kind of wood that only grows in one place or something that's, a luxury item. But they would still carry luxury items. And so everything docks there and then is ferried down to the planet, by shuttles, including people, because, there's a lot of travel between the League worlds. I got to tell you, coming up with names for all those lead planets, that was a pain in the ass all through this thing. It's like, okay, what am I going to call this planet? What's it like? And, so trying to create all these different worlds, and especially for the aliens, what their worlds are like. So.
Well, yeah, so I guess let's talk about the aliens. So I think you mentioned there are 5 known...
5 civilized races, yes.
Yeah. I think the Asanjo, Hajin, Tiponi, Sidon, and Karaat.
Yes.
So what was the process like of why did you want 5 and how much?
Well, partly it was a callback to the hideous thing that we did when America was first settled, where we referred to the 5 Indian nations as the 5 civilized nations. So I was doing a little bit of callback to that racism that's in our history regarding the Cherokee, the Iroquois, so forth and so on. And I just had us carry that same, human racism and apply it to these aliens. The Hajin are somewhat, they're herbivores, sort of horse-like. And as people may know who know me, I'm horse crazy. I own two Lusitanos and I ride all the time. So it was fun researching how a herbivore would develop. Like, the females have heat cycles, unlike humans who we don't have a heat cycle. We're sort of always able to become pregnant as opposed to other creatures. The Tiponi flutes, that was just me having some fun with what if a plant became sentient? What if a plant-based creature? And that they're a little bit elusive and hard to understand. And the Sidoni are big spiders, so they don't get a lot of terrorists, to put it mildly. And the Asanjo are sort of my, they're out there in the world being a lot, and they're servants. Mostly the Hajin and the Asanjo are servants. And then the Karaot are the race that the humans most fear, that they had the hardest time conquering, and they are master traders. And while they trade in luxury goods, they mostly trade in DNA from various worlds and creatures. And they are chameleons. They change themselves constantly, their genders, how many arms and legs they have. They can completely rework a physical body. And so the humans fear them a great deal.
And so I guess most authors have their cat aliens and you have your horse aliens.
Yeah. And I guess my Asanjo are sort of like lemurs. That's like big lemurs. That's how I picture my Asanjo.
Uh-huh. So you mentioned, there's, I think you called it the New Mexico Mafia. There's all these science fiction authors there. And you say in the acknowledgments that there are a bunch of authors. You mentioned Ty and Daniel, and then also Eric Kelly and Sage Walker and Matt Wrighton all sort of helped you out. Could you talk about sort of to what extent this book was collaborative with people that you know?
It was collaborative in the sense that we were all in a writer's group together. And so I would bring in 2 or 3 chapters each month for people to read and critique and give me feedback. And Sage is a retired physician, so she was very helpful to me on some of the issues of alien physiology and how the Karaot would do their thing. And Eric was one of my beta readers. He read the book when it was done and gave me some feedback. So in that sense, it was collaborative in that it was a great writers group and I was getting the benefit of all of their insights.
You say that Ty and Daniel helped you plot out the arc, created the arc of Imperials? Yes.
When I first came to Hollywood and got my job on Star Trek, I'd always been an outliner. I mean, I think as part of being a lawyer, I always outlined my books. But it wasn't until I came to Hollywood and discovered the art of breaking a story in this very detailed way that we do it in a writer's room. And I was like, oh, be still my heart. Where has this been all my life? And when I left Hollywood and went back home for a while, I brought the concept back to the writers group. And I said, I think this would work for novels too. And obviously we don't do it in as detailed a form as we would do in a writer's room for a 50-minute script. But we began to break each other's stories. And so the rule was, hey, I've got this idea for a new book or a new book series. I'd like to pull the troops together to have a plot break. And you have to buy the group either lunch or dinner if they come and help you. And then you spend all day with a whiteboard or a cork board and 3x5 cards, and you lay out you lay out the arc of the story. We did that with Daniel's Dagger and the Coin series. We did it with some of Walter John's books. And when it came time for me to plot all 5 books of the Imperials saga, I called in Walter and Ty and Daniel, and we got together, and I brought the whiteboard, and we started to work on it. And there are changes. I mean, initially we had 6 books, and then as I got into really getting detailed on the outlines, I realized that 5 books would enable me to tell the story adequately. I didn't need the extra book.
I mean, I've only ever written short stories, so just the idea of plotting out 5 books, I'm very impressed that you're able to do that.
Well, I knew how it ended. I won't start something if I don't know how it ends. I have to see that ending. It has to be absolutely solid for me. If it's not there, I don't start it because I know it will be a mess. And the key to how we do it, and how we do it in a writer's room in Hollywood too, is you plot backwards. You put down the end of the thing. I break my books into a teaser and 4 acts, or 3 acts, depending on the length. And then I put down the final big climactic thing at the end of Act 3, say. And then I fill in the end of Act 2 and the end of Act 1, and I'll have the teaser. If I can get the teaser and the conclusion, the climax and the teaser, the rest of it becomes easy. And once I know where I have to go, then I know the scenes I need to get me there. And with the books, I knew how it ended. I knew where it ended for all the characters. Then it was just a matter of figuring out, what is the climax of each of these books. And then, and to be honest, I mean, my proposal to my agent took out, book 1 was very detailed. Book 2 a little less so, and then it became less detailed as we got to book 5 because, there are going to be some adjustments and changes as you go.
But it sounds like the publisher bought all 5 books, right? So they must have been pretty confident that you were going to deliver, right?
Yes. I have a track record, so they were good with that. Although traditional publishing is having its issues, and so my agent and I are exploring some other options that I can't really go into right now, but I'll keep you posted when I can talk about it.
Okay, because I think 3 of the books are out right now, and 2 are still to be published. Or
book 4 is completed. I'm working on book 5, but we're looking at maybe taking some. I mean, the landscape for fiction is definitely evolving, shall we say?
So what do you mean by that? The landscape is evolving.
Brick and mortar bookstores are becoming very problematic. We lost Borders. All these others have gone. Barnes and Noble is none too solid financially or stable financially. And I think that that there are more and more people are reading electronically. I know I do. Rather than carry a big bag of books on the airplane, I now have everything on an iPad. And so I think you just have to, I just think the paradigm of how publishing has worked is being redefined, and you have to move with the times.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess you probably can't talk about it, but you see sort of self-publishing or sort of e-publishing in the future?
A form of self-publishing. I mean, what Amazon is doing, for example, with Amazon Publishing, which you still have to have an agent, and they act like a big publisher, but it's print on demand, so you're not up against the fact that the publisher's printed 6,000 copies and, oh my God, you didn't sell them, and now they're going to strip them and send them back. I mean, all of that kind of nonsense that came out of magazine sales in the 1930s that was just crazy for books. All of that is sort of changing. I mean, you can call Amazon Publishing, you can download the book electronically. You can also call up and say, hey, I need 30 copies of the book. And they'll print them with the cover and and ship them to wherever it is you need them. So I just think that the marketplace as we know it is certainly in flux and in transition. And you just have to figure out, what's the best place for you as an author to work within that. But I really can't say too much more.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of sort of financial difficulties and things, you say that my patient stockbroker, Brian Bauer, spends a long time talking with me about how to ruin a person's finances or a planet's economy.
Yes, he was one of my advisors on this. um, when I have the emperor showing Mercedes how to bring down a rival by price fixing and manipulating the market, I went to Brian and he walked me through some of that. I mean, some of that I know because I'm a businesswoman and I have investments, but it was really helpful to have an expert because he's not only a stockbroker, he was a banker too. So I had his expertise. I think that's one of the things a lot of science fiction writers overlook is economics, and fantasy writers too, for that matter. I mean, it's like, how are you going to pay for that? And, what is the money and what is the currency and what about inflation? And, all of these questions that, are there monetary manipulations? Is there a Fed, that's deciding where interest rates are? And I find that stuff really interesting. It's just making it interesting for a reader. I'm going to call out Daniel Abraham. I think he did a great job in his series, The Dagger and the Coin, where one of his main characters is a banker.
Well, yeah, and I interviewed Walter John Williams as well, and I think it was the fourth book in the Praxis series. There's a pretty long, detailed section about how to, about financial shenanigans and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and what fun was that? I loved that section. That was great.
Absolutely. Is there anything that Brian Bauer said to you that you remember, like, oh, that's a specific thing that I wouldn't have thought of on my own?
God, let me try to think back. That was quite a while ago. I think the idea of buying up a supply of a particular thing, whether it's lithium or whatever it is, you buy it, hoard it, make it scarce, and then flood the market. I don't think I would have maybe come to that on my own as quickly. I might have gone to much more playing games with interest rates or making money costs more. And he was saying you can entice somebody to invest heavily in a particular item and then gut the market and ruin them because they can't sell it. They're selling it below cost. And so that was the game I played in the book.
Right. I thought it was sort of diabolical too, that I don't think would have occurred to me that, the emperor is going to sell tons and tons of lithium or whatever it is in order to drive the price down. But then it's also pointed out that if you're the first person who starts selling it, the price is dropping incrementally. So you're actually getting a pretty good deal.
Yeah, you're getting a great
at the
return
beginning.
on your money. Yeah. And then the other people are getting screwed, which is why insider trading is so pernicious. Why we make it illegal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was really cool. One thing I noticed is that, as I said, the title of the first book is The High Ground, and The High Ground is also the title of one of the episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation that you wrote. I was just curious if there's any connection there, or do you just really
I just
love
like
that
the title.
or...
I just like that title, and it kind of fits in so many places. And it was my title before because that was what I had called. I had always called my military, and I had written the first version of this book. Back the trunk version of this book that had different characters and, different thing going on. I had called this the Academy, the High Ground. That was before I ever went to Star Trek. So it's just it's been a title that I've used a lot.
Oh, wow. So what year did you start the earliest version of this?
The trunk novel version of this was probably in the early 80s, maybe 84, before I went off to Trek. I had written a ton of pages on it and it just didn't work. I knew the universe was cool, but I had the wrong characters and I had the wrong, actually in that version of the book, the character is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, an older man in his 50s instead of these two kids. And then I realized that was the wrong approach. What I really needed to do was go with a younger generation and follow them.
And so did you not touch it really at all for like 20 years, or were you? Oh,
it's done.
Revisiting?
I revisited in the sense that there are pieces of it that I could cannibalize to bring into the Imperials books. But, every writer has trunk books, and sometimes you just have to say that didn't work. It's not wasted effort. You always you become a better writer by doing it, and there may be some kernel of it that you can mine and use that's going to be helpful later. But no, I generally if a book doesn't work, move on. I've seen too many writers get hung up and spend 10 or 12 years writing and fussing with a book that isn't working. And if it's, at some point you have to say, okay, I got to move on, or I've got to completely rethink this thing. And I think Hollywood's been very helpful for that. I mean, sometimes your studio or your network comes back and says, we hate this, replot it. And then, you got to replot something really fast and on the fly and then rewrite it. And that's actually a good skill to have.
I was looking at the Wikipedia article for the Star Trek episode, The High Ground, and there's kind of this interesting note where it says that in that episode, Data notes in passing that Ireland was unified in 2024, and as a result of that, the BBC wouldn't show the episode for a long time. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I don't know anything about that.
This is total news to you?
No, I'd heard rumors about it. I just... part of it is that was such a long time ago. I have a really hard time remembering some of what went on. And I make it a policy. I never read reviews, and I never read anything about myself either. I hope there isn't stuff that's out there that's horrible, because I would not know. I think that's death for a writer. If you see a bad review, it crushes you and you obsess on it. And if you get a good review, all it does is feed your ego. So I just keep my head down and do the work. I think for me, it's a better way to operate.
So did you put this thing in about Ireland being unified, or was that something else in the writer's room?
Yeah, I put it in. I want, you need to, what does happen? I mean, there should be some change in how things, in how the world develops. You can't just assume everything's going to stay the same over several hundred years,
Yeah. Would it ever have occurred to you that someone would take exception to that, or you're just like, oh, it's a science fiction show?
I was like, it's a science fiction show. Here's something that could be science fiction-y. It never occurred to me that it would be so fraught, which was a good lesson, to at least think about it. I mean, the question is, how safe do you play it, and when do you push and challenge?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned, I said that Roger Zelazny is my favorite author, and so I've always wanted to go to Santa Fe because, I know he lived there for many years. I was just curious if you could say a bit more about what your experience with him was like, and I don't know, is there anything in Santa Fe that I should check out if I ever go there?
Well, his house, unfortunately, has been sold several times. His wonderful, wonderful home up on Stagecoach Road. I remember, Roger and I became very close in the final 2 years of his life. He joined our gaming group. He would come and have dinner at our house many, many evenings. He was truly just the most charming, kind person I've ever known. I grieve to this day that we lost him so young. All those books that I didn't get to read. And his wit and charm. And he was playing an outer space game that my ex-husband was running, and he was playing the chaplain on the ship, and we were going into battle, and he offered a prayer, and it was is it Creatures of Light and Darkness? I can't remember where he has the big prayer, but he took that prayer and he just sort of changed it on the fly, and he delivered this long, beautiful prayer, to whichever gods might be listening, and please don't be offended. And, if you're so inclined, look upon us with victory. And that room was filled with Walter John Williams, Roger Zelazny, George Martin. I had to pinch myself a few times as we were playing that game. And Roger was so cute. They would come to dinner, and my horses used to be on our property. And for those of you horse people, we put fly masks on them in the summertime so the flies don't irritate their ears and eyes. And so there are these masks on their faces, and Roger had never seen anything like that. And he came into the house and he said, "Are your horses going incognito to a masked ball?" And I was like, "I love you. You're the greatest man in the world." No, he was wonderful. And I just, I remember the very first time I met him was at a barbecue at George's house, and I literally was struck dumb. I could not speak because this was Roger Zelazny, and he had written Lord of Light and Call Me Conrad. And I was just, I'm sure I sounded like an idiot to him. So I'm really glad we got an opportunity to actually get to know each other and me get past being tongue-tied with awe.
I saw somewhere you said that he encouraged you not to publish under Snodgrass and not take some other name.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I had just started writing, and this literary agent that I had that was also Victor Milan's and Bob Vardaman's agent was at this dinner we were all at the local science fiction convention, and she said, "You have to change your name." And Roger immediately said, No, she doesn't. He said, "Look at my name. Nobody, even though I'm on the bottom shelf in every bookstore," he said, "nobody forgets my name." And he turned to me and he said, "Don't you change your name, because nobody will ever forget that name." And I kept it. Also, it would have broken my father's heart if I'd changed my name and written under a pseudonym.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, I said he was my favorite author for my whole life since I was, 14 or something. And everyone always had a hard time pronouncing the name. And I'd always say, no, it's Zelazny. It's so simple. But then I just found out like a year ago, it's actually Zelazny. And so now I have to sort of mentally, concentrate to say it right every time now.
Yeah, the Zelazny versus Zelazny. You were giving it a very elegant twist.
But so he has a house up on a hill. I mean, obviously,
he had a house.
I won't go inside of it, yeah. But
he had a beautiful, beautiful home up at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Santa Fe, and his writing office was this huge space with this gigantic window, just that looked out on the mountains. And I swear, in some ways, I was like, how can you possibly concentrate to write when you're looking out at this kind of beauty? But no, he had this space that was his, and this huge picture window with the mountains just framed by it, and a beautiful space to work in. But like I said, after Roger's death, his wife, sold the house and downsized. It was a big house. It was a big place. Mm-hmm. So, but if you go to the Jean Cocteau Theater, George has all of our various books there, and I know there are some of Roger's books there too. I don't know if any of them are signed, if he has any signed copies left, but...
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely want to go to the Jean Cocteau. Do you want to just explain for listeners what that is?
Yeah, the Jean Cocteau is a very small movie theater that George bought in this sort of historic building that was built in 1902. It's George's train set. He gets to have so much fun. And it has, he's turned it into probably the best science fiction independent bookstore in the Southwest. Because in addition to the little movie theater, there's a sort of bar, they have a liquor license, so there's a bar, and then there's concessions. And then he has artists come in and hang their art for a few weeks, so you get to see various artists, Santa Fe artists. And he has all of our books, and he does events where when they're not doing movies, he'll have an event where Connie Willis will come down and I'll interview her, and then she'll do a signing afterwards when she has a new book out, and various. And he's had so many great writers, and not always just science fiction writers. I mean, sometimes it's been literary novelists as well. And you can find anybody who's been a guest at the Jean Cocteau, they keep their books and have them on hand, so you can go in and buy some books and have a White Walker cocktail while you're there. Watch a small independent movie. And when George is in town, you'll often find him there ensconced in his armchair by the fireplace. So in the evenings to visit with people. So it's great fun. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. And there's the Meow Wolf thing there too, right?
Oh, Meow Wolf is fabulous. Meow Wolf is an art installation that George owns the building that the installation is in. And he went in to work with this genius. I can't remember Vince's last name, but he invited a number of artists. They had a sort of overarching story, and then they designed rooms in this mysterious mansion that there's a great mystery associated with what happened to the people who owned the house. And when you go into Meow Wolf, you're transported into different worlds, and it's so worth doing. But at peak tourist time, I highly recommend people go online and book the time of their entry, because otherwise you'll stand in line for an hour and a half. So, but Meow Wolf is fantastic. So, and they are branching out. There's going to be one in Denver. They're working in Las Vegas, and I think they're working on Austin and Los Angeles, but I won't swear to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a documentary that just came out called Meow Wolf Origin Story, and my girlfriend and I just watched it, and it's pretty amazing. And George is kind of a character in it, so people should definitely check that out.
Yeah, when Vince came to him and said, "There's this old abandoned bowling alley, and I think you should buy it and let us put an art installation in it," and George went, "Okay." So,
have you seen the documentary?
I have not. I didn't even know there was a documentary, but that's deeply cool.
Yeah, no, there's a really funny shot in it where, George has agreed to invest, I think, something like $800,000 to buy this bowling alley and refurbish it and turn it into this art space. And then it turns out that it's going to cost $1.8 million or something. And that they just have a shot of George just looking sort of put out or something. It's really funny.
Yes. It was a lot of work to gut that building and then bring it up to some kind of code. It was something. But it's if you're ever in Santa Fe, it is a must. Definitely go see Meow Wolf.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so there's just a couple other things I wanted to mention. So in an interview I watched with you, you said that Empire Strikes Back changed your life. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, people laugh at me. I'm going to tell the story anyway. I don't care if it humiliates myself. I was a deeply unhappy lawyer. I was in this law office. I hated it. I would get into work in the morning, close my door, cry for about 15 minutes, and then get control of myself and get on with work. And my best friend at the time, this was before George had moved down to New Mexico, was Victor Milan. And he was saying, "I bet you could write if you tried, because you're a singer, you studied opera in Europe, you do ballet, you do all this other stuff. You're very artistic." And I was scared because it was a big change because, you finish law school, you pass the bar, you feel like you should do this. And Vic and I had seen Star Wars together on opening night, and we made it a tradition that we always went to see the new Star Wars movie the moment it opened. I'm giving away how old I am. And we went to see Empire, and we got to the scene with Yoda and Luke, and Luke says, "I'll try." And Yoda says, "Do or do not. There is no try." And for some reason, it was like a thunderbolt for me. And I was like, I can spend the rest of my life in this law firm, and in a few years, maybe I'll have the big office and I'll be terrorizing some young associate the way I'm being terrorized. Or I can try to have my own life, chart my own life. And do or do not, there is no try. So I walked into the office the next morning. I typed up a letter of resignation. I packed up my plants and my diplomas, and I laid it on my boss's desk, and I walked out. And that was it. I quit on the spot and started to write. Dick was my mentor. I started writing books, and turned out to be a good choice.
Well, right. And you say that people laugh at you, but I mean, I really, one of my things that I go on about a lot is that, I'm not religious at all, but I feel like fantasy and science fiction functions like a religion in my life. That it's sort of, these sort of mythical stories that examine ethical issues and give you a sense of purpose and all this kind of stuff. And so I think it's cool and makes total sense to me that Empire Strikes Back would have that kind of profound impact.
Well,
on me.
I love Star Wars. I adore Star Wars. And, it literally changed my life. And it's just that I remember I mentioned this once to somebody who looked at me and said, "You took advice from a green puppet." And I was like, yeah, I guess I did. But it worked out.
He's a very, very wise green puppet.
Yeah. Who has odd syntax, but other than that.
And then just another interesting thing I came across is that you said that you've played Dragon Age Origins all the way through 4 or 5 times.
Yes, I love that game. I love that game, which is weird because I'm much more of a science fiction nerd than a fantasy nerd. But If Mass Effect hadn't screwed up the end of Game 3, I would have given it the prize for being the best video game I've ever played, but it loses out to Dragon Age Origins as a result. I mean, that game is brilliant. It is so complex. It has a fascinating villain who is not really a villain. He's a tragic figure who's fighting the last war and doesn't realize the game has, the rules have changed. There are these subplots, and the choices you make in Dragon Age, you have to make just gut-wrenching choices. And if you play as a real jerk through the game, you'll end up in the final battle with no companions. Your companions will leave you. They'll go, nope, not having anything more to do with you. You're terrible. And they'll abandon you. I think it's a stunning game. And yeah, the gameplay is antiquated and it's not as clean. And, the character you play doesn't speak in this particular game. But, oh my God, it's a great game.
I haven't played it, but so is it not like watching a movie 5 times where because you make choices, it's sort of a different experience every time you play, or?
Yeah, and I just, I sometimes make different choices. I tend to play paladins a lot, which is why it's kind of fun with my new character in Wildcards, who's such a bastard that he's kind of fun to write. But I think it's also that every time I play that game, I find some new little tiny Easter egg I missed. It's amazing. There are all these little hidden things, places I didn't explore. And I'm a completist. I have to do every single stupid mission. I guess because I invest so much of myself into the characters, it always feels fresh to me. And I really enjoy it. I'm trying to learn Witcher 3, but my God, the combat system is so fiddly, and I keep not having enough time to focus on it to really get it down. So,
well, yeah, it sounds like you're really, really busy right now.
Yeah, I have been. I mean, we're on a hiatus now. We're pretty much done with all of our work, and now it's on the knees of the gods and the Hulu people to see, what happens next. So.
I mean, this is for the Wildcards TV
The Wildcards TV shows, yes.
So you've, I don't know if you can say, but you finished, what have you?
We finished the work that we set when the writer's room, it was a 28-week writer's room for some of us. And the 28 weeks was up on July 5th. And we've done we were in the process of delivering what we promised we would deliver so that they could make a decision based on the material. So that's about all I can say at the moment.
So the scripts, I don't know if you can
some
say,
scripts and some outlines, and now we'll see. But it was a wonderful writing staff, and I can't say enough good about all of them. And our showrunner Andrew Miller is fantastic, and it's been a glorious experience. It was so wonderful to get back in a writer's room. I really had missed it. It's intense, but it was fantastic.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope that happens, because if people don't know, Wildcards, it's the superhero world, and it's very gritty and deals, is a lot more realistic and less cartoonish than sort of typical superhero stuff. Yes,
very much. And there's no spandex. We have a no spandex rule. And if you die in Wildcards, you're dead. There is no coming back. Death should have consequences in fiction.
Yeah, well, I certainly I'm really looking forward to seeing that if everything works out.
Yes. Well, fortunately, this is a brand new, like with publishing, this brand new paradigm. There are so many ways in which you can consume media now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're pretty much out of time. So is there any final thoughts you have, or any other projects that you want to let people know about?
No, I don't think so. Right now I'm still buried in finishing off Imperials and bringing Mercedes and Tracy to a safe harbor, and then I'll think about my next thing. Then, I'm in waiting mode and putting my focus on the books right now. But thank you very much for the opportunity to visit.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much for appearing on the show. And so we've been speaking with Melinda Snodgrass about her novel, The High Ground. So Melinda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Melinda Snodgrass for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to John Torvaldson, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.